All right, mathematicians. We've been in this chapter section looking at properties of numbers, and we've been looking at a number of different properties, the reflexive property, symmetric property, transitive property, substitution property, additive identity property, as well as the additive inverse property. And then we've also looked at the multiplicative identity property. And I don't think we talked about the property of zero. Remind me to do that. And also the multiplicative inverse of property. And continuing on with all these properties, we've looked at the commutative property, the associative property, and I think that's it. Okay, bunch of different properties, and we use these properties to evaluate algebraic expressions, and as well as algebraic equations. Most of the time we do this unconsciously, but in this chapter section we're trying to be conscious about that and identify which properties we're using as we go step by step in evaluating algebraic expressions. So let's take a look at a couple of or a few examples, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so let's turn in your books to page 17. I'm going to example 1, which is evaluate using properties. And I'm looking specifically down at the bottom of that example in the guided practice. And so we have an algebraic expression that is 2 times, I'll make that a little bigger. Well, okay, 2 times 3 plus 4 times 2 minus 8. And so we're going to evaluate this as expression. We're going to go step by step. And as we're doing so, we're going to identify which properties of numbers that we're actually using. So let's go. Of course, we got our parentheses here that we see. So we know we got to first, according to our order of operations, deal with that. And we're going to begin with looking at, so we still got our 2 times 3 plus, I'm inside the parentheses, excuse me, and I'm going to go 4 times 2. 4 times 2, of course, is 8. Now, on this step, I have used the substitution property. And from now on, rather than spell out substitution, I'm just going to write sub. All right, so next step, we're still inside the parentheses. We got 2 times 3, and we're going to evaluate inside that parentheses. And so 8 minus 8, of course, is 0. And that is, the property we used for that is the additive, and I'm just going to say add, inverse. So that additive inverse property, of course, if you remember that a number, the opposite of a number or the inverse of the number is just changing the sign. So we had a positive 8 right here, and that additive inverse is a minus 8, and of course anytime we've got an additive inverse, that is going to equal 0. All right, so we can finish this up right now. Let's see, let me get back to the blue color. And so 2 times 3 is 6. Well, I didn't get to blue, I got to yellow. Okay, well that'll work. 6 plus 0. All right, so here on the 2 times 3, right here, I'm going to go, now I'm going blue, right there. The property that we used there is the substitution property. And 6 plus 0, well, 6 plus 0, we evaluate that, we know that is just 6. And that is the additive, and I'm just going to write add, identity property. D-E-N-I-T-Y. The additive identity property, which of course just restating in kind of simple words, any number that is added to 0 is going to be equal to itself. That is the additive identity property. Okay, let's look at one more. Here we've got 7 times 1 over 7 plus 6 parentheses 15 divided by 3 minus 5. Oh, we got a big mess here. Okay, let's break this down step by step. So I'm going to stay out here because I know in order of operations, I got to go inside that parentheses first. So I got 7 times 7. 7 times 1 over 7, excuse me, 7 times 1 over 7 plus 6. And I'm going to go ahead and evaluate here first. It's 15 divided by 3. So I'm inside the parentheses. I still got to work through the order of operations. So I'm looking to multiply or divide. In this case, I'm going to divide. And 15 divided by 3 is 5 minus 5. And so as I'm looking at this right here, guess what I used? I used the substitution property. All right, so we're going to carry on. I still got 7 times 1 over 7 plus 6. It's still sitting out here. We're going to evaluate inside the parentheses. And this 5 minus 5, of course, is 0. And hey, how about it? We got the additive. We'll make it a little plus sign. The additive inverse property, because I've got a positive 5 there and a minus 5, got a number that is the opposite to itself, 5 minus 5, and that is 0. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to keep my little 7 times 1 over 7 here for a bit. And 6 times 0, of course, is 0, and that is the multiplicative inverse. Excuse me. That is the multiplicative property of 0. So that's the right here is the multiplicative property of 0. Any number multiplied by 0 is going to equal 0. Let me see. I got to get my plus sign back in here. Not that it matters. Okay, so let's evaluate this 7 over 1 over 7, which we know, of course, is just 1. But that is example. When I do the 7 times 1 over 7, that's an example of what I said just a moment ago incorrectly, which is now correct, the multiplicative inverse property. So the inverse of any number is the reciprocal of that number. So here we had in reality, although we don't write it, this 7 right here is really, we could express that as 7 over 1. And the reciprocal of that is 1 over 7. So 7 times 1 over 7 is the multiplicative inverse, means that any number multiplied by its reciprocal is 1. And so then lastly, we're ready to finish this thing up. 1 plus 0, of course, is just 1. And we can now state that that is true based upon the additive identity property. Kind of painstaking, but there it is, step by step. Like I said, most of this we do unconsciously. All right, gang, let's continue on. Let's move over to page 19, and I'm looking at example 3, use multiplication properties. Again, I'm looking down at the bottom of that example under the guided practice, and so let's look at this expression right here. I've got 2.9, 2 and 9 tenths. 2 and 9 tenths times 4 times 10. Okay. So 2.9 times 4 times 10. Well, the commutative property would say that it doesn't really matter what order I multiply things together by. It's not going to change the product. So I'm just going to rewrite this to say 2.9 times 10 times 4. So that's an example of the commutative property. All right. Now, the associative property says that if I'm multiplying 3 or more numbers together, it doesn't really matter how I group them. So I'm going to say that this 2.9 times 10, I'm going to put that in a grouping in parentheses, and then I'm going to come back and multiply the whole thing times 4. So why would I want to do that? Well, I can see that 2 times 2 and 9/10 times 10 seems to be much easier to multiply together than times 4, because 2.9 times 10 is just going to equal 29. I kind of like that, so I got the 29 times 4. But up here, this 2.9 times 10, grouping it that way is an example of the associative property. Associative property. Okay, so now I got 29 times 4. And right here, what I did right in that step right there is actually substitution. And we're going to finish this thing off by 29 times 4, which is going to equal 116. And that last step is an example of substitution. When in doubt, you're probably substituting. Substitution property. Okay, so let's look at another one here. We've got an expression that says 5 over 3 times 25 times 3 times 2. Okay, that looks like a big mess. But I'm going to reorganize this thing a little bit. And I'm going to say that I'm going to put it in this order. I'm going to put 5 over 3 times 3 times 25 times 2. All right, so again, commutative property would say it doesn't matter which order I do it. When I'm multiplying a series of numbers together, the product's going to be the same, so we just use the commutative property to take care of that. And now I'm going to use the associative property, and I'm going to group these. So I'm going to say my 5 over 3 times 3. I kind of like that grouping. And along with that, I'm going to group this 25 and 2 together, because I can do that one pretty easily in my head as well. But all of that is an example of using the associative property. Associative property saying that it doesn't really matter if I'm multiplying a series of numbers together. It doesn't matter how I group them. My product's going to be the same. And of course, the reason why I wanted to group that is I can cancel out these 3's right here. And that's going to leave me with 5 times, and 25 times 2 is easy for me to figure in my head. That's 50. And that all is substitution property. And we're going to finish this thing up. Let's finish it up by 5 times 50 equals 250. And that is also an example of substitution property. And I am done.